Lesson 4, the psychological I, ego, formation, manifestation, and nourishment, its possession and causes. We know that the psychological I is bundle of vices, errors, and defects. Religion calls them sins. The certainty of this ego or aggregates that are formed within us and all alive are within our psyche, bottling up and robbing our conscience by feeding itself on our life's energy. We are talking concretely about the psychological I, that myself, whose joint form is known with the name of ego from the Latin egos, that means I. The ego or psychological I is the same subconsciousness of which the modern writers have spoken. The origin of the I goes back to beyond the ages. It is said that humanity was in a divine state. Humanity at that time was beyond the good and the bad, and their souls were pure and innocent. The I had a begin, and it inevitably has an end. Everything that has a beginning has an end. The intimate being does not have a beginning, nor will it ever have an end. It is what it is, what it has always been and will always be. The I continues after death and returns to this valley of tears to repeat events, to satisfy passions, and to pay karma. Anything that has a beginning is under the law of ending with decrepitude, degeneration, pain, passion. Our present life is the effect of our past life, and our past life is the effect of a previous cause. Every cause has its effect, and every effect its cause. All causes become effects, and all effects become causes. Thousands of I's constitute the ego which continues after death and returns to satisfy desires, and as we said, to pay karma. Each one of the I's represents its role in this painful drama of life. Each I has its own mind and its own ideas and criteria. There are those which have associations according to the similitude, and others, battling one against the other. In this matter of psychology, we must make a difference between the I and the internal being. The I is not the being, nor is the being the I. The being must not be confused with the I. For example, when someone knocks on the door, we call, "Who is knocking?" And the answer is, "Me." That is not a mistake. That's an exact answer. But when we say, "All my being is sad, ill, downcast," then, yes, we are mistaken, because the poor intellectual animal falsely called man still does not have a real being. Only the being can make things happen, but the poor robot man is unable to do anything. Everything happens to him because he is a simple mechanical toy moved by unknown forces within him. The intellectual animal has the illusion that he does things, but in truth, he does nothing, since everything is happening through him. Someone hits us, and we hit back. We are harassed for the payment of the rent. And we react, looking for money with anxiety. Someone hurts our pride, and we react, committing madness, etc. As the personality of the child develops, the I begins to show itself through that personality. The ego constitutes a second nature of an inferior and animalesque type in us. The presence in our psyche of this psychological multiplicity is what determines the lack of individuality and integrity in the human machine. Therefore, one's unique individual cannot coexist with these different, multiple, contradictory aspects. Due to this pluralized constitution, the intellectual animal can do nothing. Everything happens to this intellectual robot. Mechanically, since all the different I's are playing out their roles within their conditioning, the centers of the human machine are controlled by the pluralized I, which haphazardly uses our energy coming from the different centers, causing disequilibrium in the operation of the machine. Once the personality is totally formed in the child, it is at the service of psychological I completely. It is the cause of discord, grief, suffering, and anguish in man. It is an obstacle for man to be truly conscious, since it maintains the mind totally divided and fractioned. It has the consciousness completely bottled up, and man is only using his 3% with all the rest. 97%, in a subconscious dream. The ego, the I, myself, with its psychological aggregates, are organizations developed throughout our existences from the each birth and with the formation of our new personality in the first 7 years of life, adapting itself to these new conditions, and taking all our force and dominating the human machine in all its functions, dominating the inferior centers of man until he is turned into a complete machine. These defects, or I's, pronounce themselves by way of all the centers caused by reactions to impressions, which can be of an emotional, sexual, instinctive, or through our movement center. In that way, the I's exert action on all the 5 centers of the human machine. The personality plays a very important role in the course of our horizontal life, since it is through the personality that our I's are shown and cannot be done in the 3rd dimension without it. It is urgent to annihilate the ego, and this can only be done by fire. This is the basis for beginning with self-observation. We must refer then to the Solar Plexus. This is our emotional center, wisely placed by nature at the region of the navel. Unquestionably, the 3-brained biped, man, is completely saturated with sexual energy from our creative organs. It has been called the magical eye of the belly, and is frequently stimulated by the sexual hydrogen Si-12 that comes from the sexual organs. Hermetic philosophy states in an axiom that the region of the belly possesses a powerful sexual storage cell. By means of this sexual power, any representation can take form in the magnetic field of the solar plexus. The ideoplastic representatives constitute the content of the lower belly. In no way are we exaggerating when we emphasize the basic idea that these representatives are developed in the lower belly and later come into existence. Such psychological ideoplastic organizations could not come into existence without the sexual agent or energy. Each I has its representation, and the ego is a sum of I's. The intellectual animal is a machine controlled by diverse I's. Some I's represent anger with all its facets, while others represent greed, lust, envy, gluttony, sloth, or pride with all its facets or aggregates. Those are the red devils mentioned by the Book of the Dead from ancient Egypt. Some I's are very strong and can be produced physically with some varied amazing phenomena. For example, the juggler demon takes form from the sexual energy. An interesting account from the city of San Miniato in the area of Tedesco, located between Florence and Pisa in Italy, is told by Waldemar. A 15-year-old girl was causing sensation around the area because of the phenomenon of this demon. The sadistic demon tormented the poor girl, tormenting her day and night. Beyond all doubt, it was the juggler demon produced from the sexual energy of the damsel. Other expressions of this demon I are related in V.M. Samael's book, The 3 Mountains. There are many ideoplastic sexual exteriorations, especially pronounced in the teenage years, since the sexual force of that age has no real channel of expression, and the mind produces illusions that can actually take form. The rage of frustrated love or disappointment can be the cause of a true hell, and can cause frightful sexual emanations to become apparent in the juggler demon. Psychological one is also known as sin. Sin is a transgression against the law of God. Capital sins are those known in the Gnostic studies as the head of many others. They are 7. Anger, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, pride, laziness. These must be turned into virtues with wisdom and love. Anger can then be turned into love. Lust can be turned into scientific chastity. Greed can be turned into altruism. Envies can be turned into joy for other people's successes. Gluttony can be turned into temperance. Pride can be turned into true humility. Sloth, laziness can be turned into diligence. The I is a legion of devils, and it exists in a pluralized form. The 5 cylinders of the human machine lends itself to the force and creation of the small legion of I's, which in its entirety constitutes the ego, I, me, myself, etc. The human mind is not the brain which is within us to elaborate thoughts, but it is not the thought itself. The mind is powerful and subtle, but we have committed the error of subdividing our mind into thousands of small mental fragments. As a whole, these fragments compose the legion of the pluralized E. One may want to do, but another I says no. Let's do the opposite. Indeed, the psychological I, with all its pride, ambition, covertness, violence, etc., is an impurity within us. We have here all the factors which produce wars and dissension, cruelty, egotism, ambition, greed, hatred, and more. All human beings are imperfect, we all have the famous I, and we all have the same defects. Some have a very marked defect in one direction, and others have a very marked defect in another. We seem to be all cut by the same scissors and with the same material. The pluralized I spends our psychic material in absurd bursts of envy, anger, jealousy, vanities, greed, and fornication, just to name a few. If the pluralized I dies from moment to moment, the psychic material can be accumulated within us. Since the ego feeds on the lower passions and is nourished by our base desires, fornications, adulteries, and common base life. All of them constitute the merchants in the temple, of which the Christ spoke of in the Gospels. The I is fortified with good or bad deeds. The good ones with the hopes of receiving something in return, or the exaggeration of what one thinks is a good in one. If we commit errors, and we continue to commit them, it is clear that the I will be fortified. If we suppress the defects we know we have, they may continue in other areas of the mind or move around from one cylinder to another. For example, there are those who are dedicated to spiritual studies, and then overnight they suppress ambition violently. That type of suppression is repressed ambition, and another form of that I will be producing negative effects in the person. Certain schools exist which teach the fortification of the I. The I is always perverse. There are those who dress themselves as saints and do charitable work or leave their inheritance to a hospital with the hopes of going to heaven or having a statue raised in their name. The origin of the I is the organ kunda tiguaro. This is the origin of error and its consequences with pain. While it exists, pain and error will continue. At other more ancient times, the human being did not want to live in this world. And some sacred individuals gave the human race the abominable organ, kunda tiguador, so that he could be deluded by the beauties of this world. But those sacred individuals took the organ away from humanity, but each one of us was left with the bad consequences. Also, the organ was created to establish the gravity of the Earth's crust. All ideas, passions, affections, desires, vices, etc., have its corresponding organizations within the pluralized I. There are no true attachments with one ego to another, since they are constantly fighting for supremacy, and this depends on the circumstances, the changes of impression, events, etc. Any one ego could control the mind only to be replaced by another in agreement or against that one preceding it. Some form special groups because of affinities and associations, but they all constitute the ego or psychological I. The messages of psychological I can be classified in two ways. 1. Photographic messages. 2. Phonographic messages. The official medicine has advanced a great deal on this subject and has created a science called electrophysiology. This science allows them to photograph those electrical messages from the brain that make the human being act. They have shaped what is called electrical landscapes, mental situations that appear inside our psyche. Also, some doctors from different countries say that they are what orders the body to act and are called electrical voices. This is the very same ego that we carry in our interior. If we begin to observe ourselves at these moments, we will realize that at those times we are emitting images. If we observe our mind for a moment, we can see that each thought has a form or a representation, and each representation is in itself the ego. And if we pay strict attention, we will notice that we also have voices in our interior. To each one of us, different things are said to our conditioning. You do this, and you do the other. We all have different thoughts with its corresponding voice. Those images, that photography, come from each thought produced by the eye. When we feel great anger, there is a photographic image. And then the force of our energy, eros, is destroyed by this negative ego, this demon in us. That photographic memory and the aspect of the voice, you do this, act this way, think that way, is also necessary to be understood by us and to destroy those photographic tapes in our interior with the aid of the Divine Mother, the inner chat. It is urgent to observe the inner chatting of the mind and where it comes from. Unquestionably, the inner chat is the causa causorum of many inharmonious and disagreeable psychic states in our present, in our future. Obviously, that vain wordiness of the ambiguous chat is detrimental, harmful, and this mind talk is absurd in our inner world. Many stop talking externally, but the inner chatting kills the man. The poisonous and malevolent inner chatting is what causes inner confusion. This chat may have the truth or half-truths that are related or not in more or less an incorrect way with what was expressed or omitted. These defective aspects prepare the atmosphere so that we are victims of negative emotions. Our emotional life is based exclusively on that self-affection, and our ego may feel antipathy or even hatred, but we feel too much love for ourselves. That pride does much damage to the inner being. If we continue with this self-love, then any development of the inner being is more than impossible. We needed to learn other people's point of view and try to comprehend them. It is urgent to know how to take the place of another person, putting oneself in their shoes. Even though we are very courteous and sincere sometimes, internally, we don't get along at all. Sometimes, apparently very kind people drag their fellow man to that secret cave and do and say what they really think and feel about them. Intimate self-consideration. Intimate self-consideration is another which hypnotizes the consciousness and makes us lose much energy. If we did not commit the error of self-identification, inner consideration would be more than impossible. Elimination. As one works on oneself and understands more and more, then the necessity to radically eliminate this inner nature, that second nature of the intruder, that makes us so abominable, must be done. The worst circumstances of life, those most critical situations, the most difficult events, are always wonderful for intimate self-discovery. The calmest times are less favorable for the work on oneself. There are moments in life too complicated to notice one's identification with those events and forget oneself completely. It is at those times when, instead of losing our head, we were alert, and there we would discover with astonishment certain eyes which one had no suspicion of its existence within oneself. The sense of innocent self-observation is atrophied in all humans, but working seriously from moment to moment, this sense will be developed in a progressive way. As the sense of self-observation continues its development by continued use, we become more and more able to perceive in a direct way those eyes which never appeared before. Undoubtedly, the image of each eye can be comprehended instinctively in its intimate nature by the defect it manifests itself by. In the beginning, the student does not know where to begin, but feels the necessity to work on himself, even though completely disoriented. A great instructor says to begin with Aries, the sign which is the first of the 12 in the zodiac. And we can see the defects in that sign since we all have the same one. Also, it is important to take advantage of critical moments, the most disagreeable situations, the most adverse moments. If we are alert, then we can discover our defects, those eyes to be disintegrated urgently through comprehension and the Divine Mother. Sometimes we can see anger or pride come out caused by lust or greed, the permanent center of gravity. Since one does not have true individuality, the continuation of our purpose is of great importance. If this does not exist in us through our super effort, those different psychological defects will defer us from our real purpose. and we will lose the continuation of our intentions. As we have said before, any given I can have the power of the person's mind and centers, and then another one will fight for supremacy, therefore governing us, and may be totally opposed to any purpose or intention we had before, since it knows it's going to die. It is urgent to understand that only working on oneself with true continuation of intentions and a complete sense of moral responsibility can we be totally consecrated to that esoteric work. We must understand the necessity or remain fixed and in constant remembrance of oneself to be able to increase conscience. Every day we should make a balance of how conscious we were that day to see if this evaluation can tell us if we are being serious in our work, or if, on the contrary, we have continued living a mechanical life and repeat like parrots, or we play the same record over and over again. This reflection should be done every night, starting from the last event to the first of each day, to be able to see the results of our self-observation, and thereby have the key to our faults. The person who can transform and therefore cause that regeneration forms his center of gravity in the heart, allowing the light of the inner being, the understanding and the love of the being to clarify these events and the fixed point that person must be in when dealing with humanity. The person who learns to have his center of gravity in the heart learns to respect other people's rights, to teach with his example, and to comprehend that he can learn from everyone. Most of all, through that example he gives, he teaches how to be a useful citizen in society. What is the level of our being? Psychologically speaking, it is the point we are in, insofar as our real being is concerned and is determined by our state of consciousness. If we can imagine a flight of stairs where one could go up or down, and at the top, we will find our internal being. As we ascend, we are more and more in contact with our real being in the moral, spiritual, psychic aspect. And on the lower steps, we can find people with a different level of consciousness, just as on the higher steps, we will find people who are more awake than we are. This is the fourth lesson, dear readers, in our internet course, and we would appreciate your comments about the material you are receiving. Reviewing the psychological I, we can see that humanity, and us, since we are participants in it, all have our conscience trapped by the different I's which make our life bitter at times and shackles our soul, enslaving us. Therefore, in further lessons, we will learn the different possibilities of eliminating those multiple elements from our nature, living in our interior. After discovering those egos that personify our errors, we must work hard to eliminate them and conquer true and perpetual happiness. Thanks for your time and for your interest in learning this great knowledge. Regards and blessing, the instructor.